Despite being only a smidge over 2 months old, the Nintendo Switch 2 has proven itself as being a very controversial piece of hardware. But despite the online general consensus, I want to share my perspective on why I believe that in the end, Nintendo will once again finish ahead of the other gaming giants. To start off, we are going to have to go all the way back, and I mean way back, to the Nintendo Wii U, because I've seen a lot of people trying to compare both consoles, and trust me, this is very far from being comparable. And believe me, I adored my Wii U. I love that thing to death. But that being said, I was a kid, and I think my standards were quite lower because looking back, there's the two main reasons people keep bringing back up. And without taking too long, because people covered this a million times and over again, we had ads like this.
Woshi! It's a double Yoshi explosion!
Which did not help. And also, in marketing, they broke the two biggest rules. One, don't advertise to children because, first of all, it's unethical. Their kids are impressionable and adults shouldn't be trying to milk kids out of their money. And second of all, what money? Kids don't have money, and they were pitching this console to children primarily, and it was quite obvious. And that starts the first false equivalency. And I understand why. People see Mario on the Nintendo Switch and they just assume that the Switch is also a kid's console, but it's really just not the case. Because if you look at all of the new advertising and marketing that they do for these new consoles, whether it be the Switch 1 or Switch 2, it's more adults you'll see playing the Switch in the commercial because they want the console to be more associated with adults than for kids. Again, can kids play this console? Absolutely, but a kid can play a PS5 and you don't see PlayStation advertising towards kids really, do you now? Now let's move on to the second false equivalency because I see a lot of people also complaining that, the Switch 2 launch has been pretty underwhelming and there's just not that many games. But once again, let's look at the Wii U and how the Wii U was doing. The year the Wii U came out, and albeit it did release later on in the year, so it didn't have much of a year to release games in, but let's look at the first 4 games that came out in 2012. Again, some of these games are fantastic. I love Nintendo Lands to bits, but are we really going to compare these two lineups and say, oh yeah, they're the same? No. Because, first of all, Mario Kart World is a phenomenal game, and I won't be hearing people that say otherwise because it's factually fantastic. And also, Donkey Kong Bonanza is another beyond fantastic game. So far, this console has had banger literally after banger. And just to be clear, I understand Mario Kart World is not perfect, but let's be real, it's a great game. Now that we debunked some of the comparisons to one of Nintendo's most biggest fumbles in modern history, let's compare it to one of their biggest successes, the Nintendo Switch. The original Nintendo Switch had one colossal task to achieve, and that was to win back people's trust after the Wii U, and it was going to be no easy feat. Conceptually speaking, the Nintendo Switch was phenomenal because it really felt like what the Wii U was aiming to be but was never able to achieve. Finally being able to truly disconnect from the TV and go wherever you want, it was truly portable gaming. But unfortunately, even if the portability of the Nintendo Switch was truly a game changer, it did come at a cost. Unfortunately, the Nintendo Switch, was not as powerful as the competitors were, the PS4 and the Xbox One at the time. Sound familiar? But despite being the weakest of all three, Nintendo put all their efforts where it counted the most, and that is the games. Because once again, it doesn't matter how strong your console is, if there's no games for it, what's the point? And it truly felt throughout the generation that once Nintendo put their foot on the gas, they did not let go. The Switch got banger after banger after banger. There's so many great games on that console because, it's true. Look at my shelf, look at how many red games there are. It's crazy how many good games there are on the Nintendo Switch. But despite having a fantastic library, the games themselves were a point of conversation as well, because a lot of people felt like a lot of them were overpriced. Seem familiar? Because for the most part in the console generation, it didn't necessarily matter if it was a bigger game or smaller game, for the exception of Tears of the Kingdom of course, all of them had one steady price point. But we'll get back to that point again later. But despite the expensive games and the lack of power in the console itself, Nintendo did quite fine. Well, actually, they did more profit between 2017 to 2024 than they have from 1981 up until 2016. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like these factors actually were not deal breakers for people that wanted to enjoy the Nintendo Switch. Now, before we move on to the final part of the video, I have a very short message. If this is your first time here, hey, my name's Acadrien and I post weekly Nintendo videos just like this. So if that sounds like something you would enjoy, I would greatly appreciate it if you would simply consider to like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's go right back into the video. In the end, this is why I think Nintendo is going to win with the Nintendo Switch 2. Because despite all of the backlash that the Nintendo Switch 2 got, it kind of does actually have a lot of things going for it. And some of them, it's more predictions, but hear me out. First off, one of the most important parts of any console is going to be the price, and I think that, again, despite what people like to say, I think the Nintendo Switch 2 is very competitively priced. Especially now that there has been adjustments to all consoles across the board. The PlayStation is more expensive, the Xbox is more expensive, and the original Nintendo Switch. And of course, people could argue that the Nintendo Switch 2 could also go up in price, but I firmly do believe that the original price for the Nintendo Switch 2 was supposed to be $400, but right before launch, they bumped it up to the $450 because they knew if they bump it up now, they would definitely be opening a can of worms if they had to bump up the price later. So by bumping it up right away, they already set expectations, and that way people were already paying the $450, they can just either continue doing that, or they can toss a bone to the consumers, which will make them look better. And for those of you who are going to say, even if it's the most competitively priced, if people can't afford it, people just plain out can't afford it, here's my only rebuttal. If people want something, they will find a way to make it happen. For example, I have a friend, she said she wants to travel despite not having money. How does that work? Well, she saves up. She makes compromises so she can save more money. Not everybody can. Even if they can, it'll be at different rates. But people don't all need to rush out and buy a Switch 2 day one for the Switch 2 to be successful. People are going to be buying this console throughout the entire generation. And for better or for worse, I think the same concept applies to the games. Yes, they're expensive, but if people want them, they will find a way to buy them. But at least that Nintendo did promise that they were going to make a variable pricing scheme. Not every game was going to be full price. In the same way that Mario Kart World is, expensive, really expensive. But then Donkey Kong Bonanza, the next game to come out, was already $10 cheaper. And then the next game that came out, Dragon Drive, is even cheaper. Of course, these games don't have the same scope, but at least we have a variety. And also, in the end, not every game is for everybody. And that's fantastic, if a game doesn't appeal to you, just don't buy it. And even if the Nintendo Switch 2 doesn't outsell the Nintendo Switch 1, I don't think that's an indicator that the Switch 2 failed. And it is really early in the console generation, so it's really hard to tell how much it will genuinely sell. But personally, I feel like 110 million is probably just not off the table. But that's just my prediction. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be able to replicate the Nintendo Switch 1's success? Let me know down in the comments. I would once again like to thank you for watching the video all the way to the end, and if you did enjoy this video, why not check out another one? For whatever reason, YouTube thinks that you'll enjoy this one, so try checking out that one next. And until next time, Wadao.